Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Hey, Tim, welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneur Show. Thanks so much for taking time out for this. So, Tim, my first question is, how did Velocity Act come about?
So Velocity ACT, I had been working as a tutor with a company before, and then we just kind of launched out on our own, and it's been something we've been thinking about for a while. My brother, who is my co-partner and co-founder of Velocity, had already been doing test prep with the LSAT. That's the law school admissions test. It's the test you take to get into law school here in the United States. And he was already doing that, and then it seemed to make sense if we were going to kind of launch out on our own to kind of just launch it as a wing of Velocity to do SAT and ACT prep. And it's specifically Velocity ACT because kind of in the area where we service most, that's just happens to be the test that the students around me want to most often. And I have suspicions about why that is, but in general, it's just like there's weird little pockets in different places of the United States where either SAT or ACT is preferred. And in this strange little pocket of North Dallas, ACT winds up being the test that most of my students like. And so that's kind of, we launched with that in our heads. And so we built a video course based around that and started tutoring based on that. But I actually started with SAT way back in, gosh, what was it, 2011, something like that. No, before then, 2006. Goodness gracious, I'm an old man. But yeah, we've been doing that for a long time now. So that was sort of the origin story. And then we got with it, and we got some word of mouth and been picking up some steam ever since. It's been very, very nice. We've been very excited about it.
Got it, Tim. Great. So do you have Velocity, like Velocity ACT? Do you have other velocities yet?
So yeah, the other is Velocity Test Prep is the name of the company, and Velocity ACT is sort of the standard, the college admissions test wing of that, and then the LSAT, and we do other things as well, but those are our big guys.
And Tim, what are your suspicions about why there are pockets with certain preferences versus about ACT or SAT?
Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out how much I want to say. Like some of it could be construed as negative about some of the people I currently serve, and so I don't want to get too deeply into it. It's one of it's preference, it's inertia, and then there are practical considerations that may make one test better than another for a lot of students. Just like one important consideration is if a student has accommodations. The timing on both SAT and ACT is pretty tough, but on ACT it is way tougher. And what that means is that if you're a student who has accommodations for extra time, that is an outsized advantage for you on the ACT. Whereas the SAT, the timing's rough, but it's not that rough. So not as many students kind of struggle with the time. So if you're in a place where there are a lot of students with accommodations, I think ACT winds up kind of taking precedence.
Got it, Tim. And talking about tests going digital, what was your first reaction when SAT announced that they're going digital?
My first reaction was irritation. Because just on a personal level, it means that I had to rework how I was going to do some things. It's easy when you're doing something like test prep to kind of get in a pattern and sort of like, this is the way that we do things, and then they change things up, and you got to change the way you do things as well, which can be a big task. But that's the name of the game. So you just kind of dive in and afterward and do whatever is required of you. So other than that, I mean, it's a shorter test, and students like that. That adaptive thing is a little strange, and students are ambivalent about that. But just in terms of the format of the test, I mean, most of the stuff they're testing is the stuff they've always tested. They say the math that they're testing on the digital SAT is the same kinds of math they were testing, but when it wasn't digital. The reading looks a little different, but they're asking the same kinds of questions. Now, the vocab is something that has been off the test for several years, but they had it before, and when they did, it's the same kind of vocab. So, so the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think is a big lesson of the switch to digital. The things that students need to know in order to succeed on them haven't changed that much. What has changed is just the environment and some of the tools that SAT provides, like Desmos, which actually is a pretty powerful computer and a calculator, and so helping students to get to know that winds up being a bigger part of my job than maybe it was before.
Got it, Tim. Tim, I know you're Velocity ACT, but I'm talking about SAT. So, what's the percentage split between the number of students that come to you for ACT versus the SAT?
Well, so where I am in North Dallas, like I was saying, it's sort of like that's an ACT pocket.
Right.
So right now, gosh, let me see, something in the neighborhood of 2/3 or 3/4 of my students are studying ACT, and then the other third or
Okay.
fourth are studying SAT. That's just the story of where I am right now. And if I were to move north even a few miles, those percentages would probably be flipped.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, do you have multiple locations for Velocity ACT, and are you a in-person tutoring center?
Right. Yeah, we have an office in North Dallas. That's kind of where we're located. But we do a lot of tutoring online and a lot of tutoring in person at the on-site location in North Dallas there. And yeah, in that little sort of pocket of North Dallas, ACT winds up being a big name of the game.
Got it. And 2020 was the time when, pandemic was prevalent, and online was the primary way of, teaching. So, have you gotten back to classroom training now, or what's the percentage between classroom training and online training like, Tim?
Yeah, most students, I think, precisely because of the experience that a lot of students had with online learning, online classrooms during the pandemic, a lot of students are super resistant to online learning. And so most of what
Okay.
I do is in person, either at the office, sometimes I'll go to a person's house or something like that. Now, there are some students who don't feel that way about it, and I will say that there is a pretty dramatic difference between a one-on-one scenario online and a classroom scenario online. It is entirely too easy to disappear and ignore everything that's happening when you're in an online classroom. But when you're one-on-one, there's nowhere to hide, you know. So those
Right.
students still wind up having a pretty good experience in my as what I see. But there is some still sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Residual resistance to online learning, and for some people, such that they'd rather come to the office or rather that I come to their house.
Got it, Tim. And Tim, how have things changed for you when SAT became digital SAT from a teaching point of view, prepping, and all of those things?
Almost not at all. Like I said, I had to kind of I had to figure out what it was going to look like. So I had to spend some time on College Board and with Blue Book, and I had to look at some of the digital tests and see what was going on, what they looked like, what the new format was, what was on it. But then what I saw pretty quickly is like, oh, this is the same stuff. It's the same stuff. They've changed formats. But the kinds of questions they're asking are in general the same kinds of questions they've always asked. So the same kind of techniques and advice that we've given for a couple of decades now, we can continue to give. We just got to add some like extra bonus stuff, like talking about how to navigate Desmos and things like that.
Got it, Tim. Any patterns you've seen in terms of higher scores with digital SAT, or specifically the scores dropping in digital SAT?
No, here's the pattern that I have seen, and it's not really related to the digital format of the test. The pattern is that because of COVID, average scores on both tests dropped pretty dramatically. Of ACT,
Right.
the average national average in the United States used to hover around a 21, and for the past couple of years, it's been closer to a 19, and I feel like that's probably a function of that online learning that didn't work very well for most students in high school. Um, but it's not really because of the digital thing. Students are comfortable with digital environments. They've been on them for their whole lives. They've never lived a life where internet it wasn't
Right.
a factor in their education. So it's not really a challenge for them. And they've done other tests, especially if they've been in AP classes or anything like that. They've done other tests digitally before, so it's not so scary for them. It's just like, oh, so this is a little bit like being on a lockdown browser in school or something like that. And like, yeah, it's a little bit like that or a lot of bit like that. So as long as you can kind of get them into a frame where they're like, this is something you don't need to freak out about that. A lot of the time they'll be all right. That said, the sort of built-in resistance to digital learning in general does steer some of my students away from wanting to do the digital test at all. And for those students, of course, ACT is their only option. SAT is only digital now. ACT is beginning to offer it digitally, but they've promised that they're going to continue to do the paper and pencil test as well, which I suspect is just smart marketing on their part because it kind of covers more bases than SAT will. So until, ultimately, inevitably, everything goes digital, I think they may pick up a little bit of market share because of that.
Right. So currently, SAT is the most taken test in the US compared to the ACT.
Yep. By a little bit,
And
it kind of like, but they're sort of neck and neck, and and they kind of go through these fluctuations. One of them makes changes. I mean, the last iteration of the SAT, it was crazy that there weren't more lawsuits because what they did is they restructured the SAT to make it look more like ACT because ACT was taking over market share. And now this one, of course, we see ACT. And nobody ever says this, right? Nobody ever says we got to be more like the other guys. But of course, that's what they're doing. Of course it is, and of course that's why ACT is now offering a version of their test digitally. And of course that's why the timing is changing and getting a little bit better for students. Because ultimately, the test lives and dies by how many people sign up to take it. And so if they make their test more attractive to students, then more students will take it.
got it, Tim. Do you believe shorter tests equals easier tests?
No. No, it's a standardized test. So, like, one of the things that hasn't changed and won't change and will probably never change is that your score is a reflection of how you performed on that test in comparison to all the other students who took that exact same test as you. And because of that, there's sort of a natural bell curve thing that happens. Now, we just talked a couple of seconds ago about how the fact that the national average has dropped on the ACT, and that's also true. And that's because there are some people who, no matter what you give them, they're always going to get the absolute top possible score no matter what, right? Those people aren't going to change. But then everybody else kind of, experiences a little bit of a decline, and so that national that average drops a little bit. But it's a standardized test, and standardized tests kind of naturally default to this little bell curve thing that we sort of see over and over and over again, where there's a bunch of people right here, and then there's people falling off on either side. I'm trying to get them on this side of the bell curve.
Got it. And what are your views on the way SAT scores? It's adaptive scoring system now.
Yeah, I'm sort of agnostic. I don't have a firm like. I don't care. I was like, this is the test that they're going to give us, so this is the
It's the
test we
best,
got to
yeah.
work with. I mean, it's sort of been my position is like I don't get to decide how it looks, so I'll just do it. I think for students it can be a little bit of a mental psych out kind of a deal. Because if they do that first math section and get through it, and they get to the second math section, and all of a sudden the math seems to have gotten a lot easier, then there's those students who are likely to feel like, oh man, I blew it, I've already kind of toast because of that. And so I think it can probably have a pretty profound psychological effect on students to have those experiences. Um, and by contrast, I mean, students, where they see it getting a lot harder in the second module, it's easy to think, hey, all right, I did okay on that one, but it's also like, but this is so hard, So I think it can be sort of mentally taxing, psychologically taxing for a lot of students to have either one of those experiences. And the sort of failure of SAT now to provide the test to students so that they can look over and see what they missed and study the things that they need to know has probably also made that a little bit less attractive to some students and a little less student friendly. Remains to see whether or not students are still going to have that with the digital ACT.
Got it, Tim. And one other change that the SAT has brought about is the shorter passages for the reading. And how do you see that? You're happy with that?
I don't know. I mean, there's a part of me, my background is an English teacher, and so there's a part of me that feels like this is a capitulation to the idea that students just don't read anymore, so they're just not going to be able to handle
Yeah.
more than a few lines at a time. And that makes me sad, but such is the way of the world. I mean, I don't get this is just the way the world's moving, so we just have to deal with the way the world's moving. Um, uh, um, you know, in general, it's the same sort of stuff. It's just like smaller chunks at a time. And really, all they've done by kind of making those passages shorter is it removed one step from a student's testing experience, which is having to find the place in the passage where that was talking about. So, I mean, maybe in some ways that makes it a little bit of an easier test for some students. That said, the language itself has, in some ways, has gotten a little bit more, a little bit higher level. I mean, the reading, I think, at one point was more of a middle school level, and now we're looking at sort of college level writings in some instances. And if your student is not a reader, and they don't have a huge cache of vocabulary in their souls, then they can get tripped up even by those short passages, just because of the increased sort of complexity of the syntax and the language and that sort of thing.
Got it, Tim. And Tim, SAT is transitioned into the newer SAT now, digital SAT. ACT is going to become the enhanced SAT. What are your expectations? Are you ready to be surprised?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're always, and of course, we were very, very surprised at the rollout of the digital SAT last spring when the tests, especially the math, looked very different from all the materials they had provided. In fact, those first four tests that they provided were basically useless, at least for the math, because the math was so much harder, really. The math was quite a lot harder. The tests they've released since then have been a little bit more of a close match to what we're actually seeing, and so it's gotten better. And so what's going to happen when the digital ACT releases itself? Who's to say? I mean, like ACT knows, but I don't. And so it'll be like making my best educated guess about what things will look like. Until they actually release it, and then sort of say, and then playing a quick game of catch up after that. My best guess, since of course the ACT is not oblivious to the complaints that SAT got, is that they won't follow in those footsteps. That they'll be a little bit more careful to provide materials that actually mirror the tests they're going to be offering. But again, we don't know. We won't know until next month.
Yeah. And Tim, when students come to you, do they come with their minds prepared to go for SAT or ACT, or do you help them choose the right ones based on their strengths and weaknesses?
General, they have one in their heads, but I do have a tool to kind of help them think about which test might be better for them. The biggest and the most important question of that tool is, how are you with math? whereas math is and has been and always has been fully half of the score on SAT. It is either 25% of the score or maybe 33% of the score on the enhanced ACT. So math is going to play a less of a role in your overall score on the ACT than on the SAT. So if you're a math rock star,
Right.
SAT might be the guy for you. And if you struggle, if that's kind of your Achilles heel, then ACT might be better for you. That's not the whole story. There are other considerations dealing with time and the digital environment and how you feel about science, whether or not you want to take the science test and the essay, if you want to do the essay, whether in a college that you want to. There are other considerations, but that is the single most prominent one. How are you with math? That's probably a good place to start. But regardless of that, and regardless of the results that I get from many personality inventories that I give to students, ultimately the advice I give to everybody is take one of each, see which one you do better on, and forget about the other one. There's not a school that doesn't know how to make a very easy conversion from one to the other, so virtually no schools care which one you take. If they accept one, they'll accept the other, so you do the one that you're best at.
Got it, Tim. Tim, moving on from the technical aspects to the other things that students deal with, test anxiety is one of those things of late. And is that a thing for you? Students coming to you, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I tell you what, man, I'll tell you a short, boring story to illustrate how we deal with it. Because it's something that I've always said, but I never knew how true it was until I started playing chess. Now, I'm an old guy, and I'm not, and I should have, if I was going to ever be very good at chess, I should have started, decades ago. I didn't. I started a few years ago. And one of the things that I noticed is that if I play what's called a correspondence game, where you have like 24 hours to make a move, I can play an excellent game. An excellent game. And as soon as you bump that clock down to about 10 minutes, I'm blundering everywhere. I'm losing all my pieces. I'm losing all my games, and it's horrible. And but what happened was I just decided I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to start doing it. I'm just going to start playing those 10-minute games. And yeah, it's going to be horrible for a while. But then I'm going to get used to it. And this is where I am right now. I'm getting used to it. And though I lost a lot of ELO, that's kind of the points that you track for your chess mastery or whatever, which I am not. But as I lost a lot of points when I started playing the 10-minute games. But now I'm gaining them back. And now I'm more comfortable. And whereas before, if you taught me to play a 10-minute game of chess, I would have frozen up and freaked out. I've just done it so much now that I'm sort of used to it. Still not as good as I was when I wasn't timed at all, but much better than I used to be. And so the secret to all of this is not magic; it's work, it's practice. And so when students are kind of given the opportunity to do a lot of guided, timed practice, they start to feel it. They start to freak out less. They start to relax more. They start to get more questions right. And it's just the story of my dumb little chess journey winds up being the same story that a lot of my students are experiencing with their testing journeys. Whereas, we make them do it, and they do it enough times, and it just gets better. I mean, obviously, we're teaching them tips and tricks and techniques and how to do math and how to read questions and all the grammar rules. We're doing all that stuff. But one of the most invaluable aspects is that piece of just doing it so that you know what it feels like, so that nothing surprises you.
That was a relevant story, though, Tim. Nice analogy, actually. If they probably could see it that way, I think that's a nice perspective, actually. A lot of people have
Yeah.
told a lot of things, but this one was new. Thanks for that. And Tim, what are the other challenges students that come to you usually face, apart from having problems with the subject matter and maybe, the anxiety stuff and all of those things? Do you see any other common problems?
Yeah, I mean, those are the big ones. The big ones are not knowing the content, not knowing what's on it, not knowing what the experience is like, and then just sort of feeling overwhelmed by the whole thing. And that is sort of an irritating fact about these tests. It is sort of silly, in a way. And you know, I mean, I don't want to talk. You know, I'm going to talk myself out of a job if I'm not careful. But this is the way it works in the United States, right? If you're going to a small liberal arts college on the coast somewhere, they charge a premium for your going there. And one of the things that they do with that premium is they take a whole lot of time to look at all your personal stuff, your essays and your resumes and your letters of recommendation and all those things. Whereas a large state school, I'm in Texas, I'm in the DFW area in Texas, where University of Texas at Austin is by far the most popular choice for students around here. And because of that, all the college admissions officials have, thousands of applications coming across their desks every single day. And so it becomes very easy and very tempting to, instead of looking at all that huge stack of paperwork, to look at two numbers, the grade point average or the class rank and their SAT or ACT test scores, those two numbers. And I think one of the absurdities of this that everybody sort of acknowledges, but nobody seems to have a solution to, is that there is no way that those two numbers can say everything there is to say about a student. We
Right.
all know students who are brilliant and hardworking who just freeze up, at the process when it comes to a timed standardized testing situation, and that is a problem. And we all know students who who are brilliant test takers, but they sit in class all day long not doing a lick of the work that they're assigned to do, and so there's a kind of a the benefit of having those two numbers is that there's a little bit of a sliding scale. The higher one is, the lower the other one needs to be. And so that's helpful, but yeah, we do sort of certainly run across students for whom it's just like this horrible, scary, terrifying ogre that's standing on the bridge between them and the rest of their lives. And so, the way that we see it is this is our job, is to give those students the tools they need to build the weapons to slay that ogre and move on down the road.
Got it, Tim. Tim, I'll probably, conclude with this topic, which is the business side of test prep. So you have Velocity, ACT. What are your primary channels of student acquisition?
Rephrase that question. What are my primary challenges of student acquisition in terms of what are my challenges
Yeah,
in,
is it like
getting
mostly
more students to sign up?
Yeah, most of the people swear by referring, referral, word of mouth. That's their top way, 80-90% of them come through that.
I'm gonna
Ads
tell you
don't work for a
exactly.
ton of them.
Yeah. Nope,
So yeah,
you're right. In fact, we tried that route at the very beginning, and we spent a decent sum of money for a company that I guess I won't name to build us ads that did absolutely no good whatsoever. It was an absolute waste of time. I guess in some ways that's probably good news, because what it means is that you have to know your stuff and you have to be effective. If you're not effective, then you're not going to get the good word of mouth and you're not going to grow. So if you see that somebody is growing, then it probably means they're doing an all right job. And I'm very, very pleased. We're young, we're barely a year old now at Velocity. But the gains that we've made in this year have been very, very gratifying to me. And the scores that we've seen have been very, very gratifying to me. And that really is, yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, brother, if you got another solution, I'm happy to listen to it, because I would love to just to really just be doing this. But so far, and my experience at the company before, it's all been word of mouth. Of course, there are those big companies out there, Princeton Review, Kaplan, Karen Dillard, who've just been around for so long that they just kind of have these reputations, earned or unearned, about efficacy. But I think, for somebody like us, it really is, we're small, we're bespoke, we tailor our tutoring to the people who are in front of us at the moment. We don't have one size fits all approaches for every single student we see. And that has resulted in excellent results in terms of scores and improvements, and that has resulted in excellent word of mouth, and that has resulted in a growth that I'm very, very pleased about. It went from being very, very scary at the very beginning when we were first starting out to being, I'm not saying,
Right.
I won't say not scary. It's still scary. Everything's scary all the time. But we're starting to feel we've got our rhythm, we've got our pace, and things are going okay. But yeah, man, you got any super secret tricks or something? I'll listen to them because I'm very good at test prep. I'm a horrible business person. I don't know anything about that stuff at
I
all.
mean, um, nothing that I've found out, but some of the things that other people have shared. Probably a couple of things. The most common thing is people tie up with academic counselors, and that I believe is not legal in some of the states to tie up with public school academic
Yeah,
counselors. I
yeah.
believe so. I'm not sure how is it in your region.
I mean, I have tried to kind of get in, but I think bless those guys' hearts, like that they get so many those, and they work so hard, and they get so many emails from people like me every single day. I think the temptation, and it's an understandable one, is just to ignore those emails. So, I have a few connections, and it's been very, very helpful. But even those, it's just another sort of it's another sort of way of saying I'm gaining business by word of mouth.
Got it, Tim. Another thing that I've heard people say has worked for them, especially those who are not heavily online, but who are very local and in-person classroom sort of a training. They say instead of spending money on digital ads, they do the old-fashioned type of stuff. Putting up good posters and whatever is the best in local marketing. They've Some of them swear by that. Some of the people that I've spoken to. So these are the two things.
Yeah, we've looked a
And
little bit at that, and that's the thing. Yeah, we've looked a little bit at that, and what we found is that there's a sort of a sentiment in the specific area where I am, and I'm not saying that this is true everywhere. I think it's mostly kind of where I am, and maybe in neighborhoods sort of similar to the ones where I am, where too much advertising can be viewed with suspicion. It's like, why do you feel like you have to make ads? Like,
right.
aren't you just good enough to kind of get the word of mouth? And it can sort of backfire on you in the specific neighborhoods where I'm, operating. That isn't to say that I shouldn't branch out into other neighborhoods because it probably would be very helpful there. And we do have kind of a vision of building to a place where we can do that. And we have some other ideas, kind of irons in the fire as well. But yeah, it's tough for everybody out there. I mean, trying to be a small business owner is a scary experience. It is not for the faint of heart. It probably means it's not for me because honestly, I have a sort of a predisposition to nervousness and pessimism, even in spite of really really very good results. I mean, I really have been very fortunate to have a lot of very good word of mouth, and I'm really like proud of that and really pleased by it. But there's still that little part in my brain that's like it's all gonna end. It could end at any time, And so I have a tendency to freak out, and my brother has to talk me down, as well. You're doing okay, Timothy. Everything's okay.
Got it, Tim. Tim, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for really being candid and open about how you're feeling, especially being a small business owner. I'm sure that's gonna be relatable to a lot of other test prep tutors. And there are a couple of episodes where we dived deep into marketing and stuff like that. I'll probably send it your way if that could help you in any way
That'd
at
be
all.
great, man. I'd love to see that. For sure.
Sure, but otherwise, it was a pleasure talking to you, Tim. I'll probably get back in touch with you once
Pleasure.
the ACT is released and see the enhanced ACT and then see how things are for you 6 months down the line. Yeah.
That sounds good, man. I can't wait. Appreciate you. Thank you for your time.